Deep beneath the earth lies a realm that Japanese mythology treats with profound reverence and absolute dread. It is not a prison for the damned, nor a reward for the virtuous. It is simply there, eternal, unchanging, cold, and inescapable. This is Yomi-no-Kuni, the land of darkness, where the dead exist in a grey twilight that never breaks. Unlike the hells of other traditions that punish or reward souls based on their deeds, Yomi offers no such moral judgment. Everyone who enters remains there forever, wandering in shadows, regardless of how they lived or what they accomplished. To understand Yomi is to understand one of humanity's most profound questions, not what comes after death, but what does it mean when life and death can never truly reunite. The story of Yomi-no-Kuni is woven into the very fabric of Japanese creation itself. It emerges not as an afterthought, but as an essential counterweight to existence. Where there is life, there must be death. Where there is the bright heavens of Takamahara, there must be the darkness below. Yomi's creation teaches us something crucial about how ancient Japanese people understood the cosmos. Boundaries are sacred, and the violation of boundaries brings chaos. This is the mythological heart of Shinto belief, encoded in a narrative so powerful that it shaped funeral practices, purification rituals, and the spiritual consciousness of an entire civilization for thousands of years. The story begins not with Yomi, but with the birth of everything else. In the beginning was chaos, formless, void. Deities emerged spontaneously from this void, and eventually the highest gods commanded two divine beings to bring order, Izanagi and Izanami, he who invites and she who invites. The senior gods gave them the Ame-no-nu-hoko, a heavenly jeweled spear. Standing on the floating bridge of heaven, they thrust it downward and stirred the primordial waters. When they lifted the spear, droplets fell and created land. The first island, Onogoro-shima, rose from the foam. They descended to this island and performed a sacred ritual, circling the Ame-no-Mihashira, the pillar of heaven. But Izanami spoke first in their union, breaching cosmic protocol. Their first offspring were malformed. They tried again, with Izanagi speaking first, and the cosmos approved. From their divine union, creation flowed. Island after island emerged. The 8 major islands of Japan and 6 additional ones, the Oyashima-kumi. Gods were born to embody elements: sea, wind, mountains, rivers, rocks. Each god represented a necessary principle for the world to function. Then came Kagutsuchi, the fire god. When Izanami gave birth, the flames scorched her mortally. As she lay dying, her body continued to generate deities from her tears, her blood, her body's fluids. Even in death, she created. Izanagi, grief-stricken, slew the newborn fire god. More deities were born from Kagutsuchi's blood, but the cost was clear. Creation and death were now linked. Izanami's spirit descended downward, away from light, into what would become Yomi. Yomi-no-Kuni exists beneath the earth in a dimension that overlaps with the living world, but remains eternally separate. The Kojiki describes it as a land of profound darkness. Yomi meaning land of darkness, though the kanji carry deeper implications of impurity and contamination. The entrance to Yomi lay in Izumo province, at Yomotsu Hirasaka, the slope leading to the underworld. It was not a grand gateway, but a humble opening in the earth where the boundary between worlds thinned enough for crossing. What awaited beyond was the realm where Izanami had become something new. She no longer belonged to the living world. In Yomi, bodies exist in perpetual decay, never at rest, never completely dissolved. The dead wander in eternal twilight, neither alive nor completely gone. Some accounts mention the hags of Yomi, the Yomotsu Shikome, beings born from death itself. Others spoke of thunder gods and creatures of corruption, but the most essential feature of Yomi was this. Once you entered, if you ate the food of that land, you could never leave. This rule was not arbitrary. It was cosmic law, as fundamental as gravity. The food of Yomi was the food of death itself. To consume it was to declare yourself part of that realm, to accept death not as a moment but as eternal condition. This rule was not arbitrary. It was cosmic law, as fundamental as gravity. The food of Yomi was the food of death itself, and to consume it was to declare yourself part of that realm, to accept death not as a moment but as an eternal condition. Eating the food meant crossing a threshold from which there was no return. Izanagi could not bear the absence of his beloved. He could not accept that creation itself had been severed by death. In his grief, he made a decision that would echo through all of Japanese mythology. He would descend into Yomi. He would walk the dark slope, he would cross the boundary, and he would bring Izanami back. Few acts of defiance in world mythology are as poignant as this one. Izanagi was not descending to rescue someone innocent. He was not battling demons for a righteous cause. He was a grieving spouse who could not accept loss, who wanted to undo the fundamental law of the universe through love alone. He found the entrance and began the descent. The path grew darker as he went, the air growing colder, the sounds of the living world fading away. Eventually he reached the palace of Yomi, and there he found his wife. But Izanami could not reveal herself immediately. She was no longer in a condition to be seen by the living, no longer beautiful and graceful. She asked him to wait while she consulted with the ruler of Yomi about whether she might be permitted to return. In his anxiety, in his desperate love, Izanagi waited, but waiting became agony. Minutes felt like eternities. He could not accept that she remained trapped in that darkness, while he stood in merely dimmer darkness. His love overwhelmed him, and he broke the promise he had made. From his hair, he took a comb, broke off one of its teeth, and ignited it as a torch. The sudden light flooded the chamber. What he saw shattered him. Izanami was not as he remembered her. Her body was rotting, decomposing, crawling with maggots and the larvae of insects. Her flesh was blackened and decaying, falling from her bones. 8 gods of thunder clung to her body, their forms barely containing the corruption that had consumed her. She was not merely dead, she was dead in a way that the living cannot truly comprehend, held in a state of perpetual putrefaction that defied natural processes. In that instant, Izanagi understood something fundamental about death. It was not clean, not peaceful, not gentle. It was violent, grotesque, an assault on every sense and sensibility. The woman he had created islands with, who had birthed the gods themselves, was being unmade, dissolved, consumed by something that regarded her with utter indifference. Izanami's reaction was not sadness, but fury. "You have seen me in my shame," she cried. "You have broken your promise, and in doing so, you have dishonored everything I am. Now I declare that you will not leave this place unpunished." She called upon the hags of Yomi, the Yomotsu Shikome, hideous creatures with hair that flew wildly and eyes that wept blood. She commanded them to chase him. 8 thunder gods emerged from her decaying form itself. The boundary between realms began to collapse as Yomi pursued the living god who had dared to break its rules. Izanagi fled in terror, running through darkness that seemed to have teeth, pursued by creatures that embodied the very principle he was escaping. Izanami herself, despite her decomposed form, chased after him with an intensity born of violation and shame. He ran not toward freedom, but toward his only hope, back to the world of the living. As he raced toward the slope, he threw obstacles behind him. His stick became a god, spreading roots across the path to slow their pursuit. He threw peaches, magical fruit believed to possess spiritual power, and the creatures pursuing him were distracted, drawn to them as if the simple vitality of living things could temporarily hold their attention. He reached the entrance to Yomotsu Hirasaka, the slope leading back to the world above. Behind him, he could hear Izanami's voice, no longer his beloved's voice, but something ancient and terrible. "Izanagi, if you abandon me here, I will kill 1,000 people every day." He seized a massive boulder, one so large that it took 1,000 men to move it, and rolled it across the entrance, sealing Yomi. The connection between realms snapped shut. From beyond the boulder, Izanami's voice echoed, "Then I curse you with this truth. I will take 1,000 lives from the world each day." And Izanagi, gasping, bleeding, traumatized, replied, "And I will give birth to 1,500 lives each day. I will ensure that for every death you claim, the world continues to live." In that exchange, they established the cosmic balance between death and life. But the separation was absolute. The worlds would never be reunited. The living and the dead were now permanently divided. When Izanagi emerged fully from Yomi, he was transformed not just emotionally, but spiritually. He carried contamination with him, the Kegare, the spiritual pollution of death itself. In Shinto cosmology, death is not merely a biological process, it is a force that defiles everything it touches. To come in contact with death is to become unclean, to lose your vital energy, to become disordered and out of harmony with the kami. Izanagi understood this immediately. He felt the pollution clinging to him like something physical, a stain that no ordinary washing could remove. He traveled to the river Wato in Hyuga province, to a place called Awagihara, the plane of peaceful harmony. There, at the mouth of the Tachibana River, he performed what would become known as the first misogi, the first ritual purification. He removed his clothes. Each piece of clothing he discarded gave birth to a deity, 12 new gods born from the very filth he was removing. He waded into the river and began to wash. The water rushed over him, attempting to carry away the defilement of Yomi. As he washed his face, his left eye, more gods emerged from the purification. When he washed his right eye, another deity was born. When he washed his nose, yet another emerged. These births were not accidental, they were the result of the cosmic principle that even the darkest, most polluted things contain within them the seeds of creation. From the process of removing death stain came new life, new divinity. The purification itself was generative. Then came the moment of supreme cosmological importance. As he washed his left eye, the most luminous deity emerged, Amaterasu or Mikami, the sun goddess. Her light was so brilliant, so pure, that she immediately outshone all other kami. She was destined to rule Takamagahara, the plane of high heaven, and to become the ancestor of the Japanese imperial line. From his right eye came Tsukuyomi, the moon god, brother to Amaterasu. He would rule the night, bringing order and balance to the darkness. From his nose emerged Susanoo, the storm god, and he carried within him something different from his siblings. Because the nose was the last part washed, it still contained traces of the pollution that had clung to Izanagi. Susanoo would be marked by this inheritance, passionate, destructive, chaotic, but also capable of transformation and redemption. These three became known as the Mihashira no Uzu no Miko, the three precious children, the foundational deities of the Japanese cosmos. They embodied the three essentials: light and order, Amaterasu, regularity and night, Tsukuyomi, and wildness and change, Susanoo. Together, they represented the complete order of the universe. But their creation came at a price. To purify himself of death, Izanagi had to transform that death stain into something else. The cosmos required this exchange. Contamination became vitality, violation became creation. This is the paradox at the heart of Yomi's significance. Death is necessary for creation. Without Yomi, without the separation, without the pollution that forced purification, the three great deities would never have emerged. Izanagi now distributed the divine realms among his children. Amaterasu was given dominion over Takamagahara, the celestial realm where the gods dwelt. Tsukuyomi was granted the night and the passage of time. Susanoo was appointed to rule the great seas and storms. Each realm had its deity, each with clear responsibility. But what of Yomi? Who would rule the land of the dead? The answer was already established: Izanami. Though she existed now only as Yomotsu Okami, the great deity of the underworld, she maintained dominion over that realm. It was her kingdom, not through any formal appointment, but through the inescapable fact of her transformation. She was death, and death was her to command. And yet, Izanami could not rule alone. The realm of the dead exists in perpetual tension with the realm of the living. Yomi must be kept separate, sealed, its entrance guarded. In some versions of the mythology, the boulder that Izanagi placed at Yomotsu Hirasaka itself became a god, Chigeishi no Okami, the god who turns back the path, forever preventing the dead from returning. The law that governed Yomi became an absolute cosmic principle. Once the food of the underworld enters the body, escape becomes impossible. This was not punishment, but nature itself. It was how the universe maintained the distinction between categories. how it prevented the living and the dead from becoming entangled, how it preserved order. In Shinto thought, this concept of maintaining boundaries between sacred and profane, pure and polluted, living and dead, became central to all religious practice. When people visit Shinto shrines even today, they perform the ritual of water purification at the entrance, the Temezuya. They wash their hands and rinse their mouths before proceeding. This practice traces directly back to Izanagi's original misogi, to the recognition that death clings to the living and must be consciously removed before approaching the sacred. The priest of a Shinto shrine must be particularly careful. Contact with death, a funeral, the preparation of a corpse, attendance at another's funeral, renders the priest unclean. They must perform purification before resuming their duties. Even attending a wake or death-related event can cause Kegare, spiritual pollution that spreads like an invisible stain. But Yomi represents more than simple physical or spiritual contagion. It embodies the Japanese understanding of death as a transition rather than an ending or judgment. The dead do not face punishment or reward in Yomi. They do not suffer or find joy. They simply exist in a state of perpetual in-betweenness, separated from the living, from action, from the world's light. Some later versions of the myth suggest that the dead eventually might be incorporated into ancestor worship, becoming not fully deceased but semi-divine, ancestral presences that hover between Yomi and the living world. In this interpretation, the boundary is not absolutely impermeable. It is maintained, sacred, but permeable at specific times, during the Obon festival for instance, and through specific rituals, ancestor veneration, offerings. The mythology of Yomi does not end with Izanagi's escape and sealing. In some accounts, Susanoo, one of the three precious children, himself descended into Yomi. According to certain versions, he grieved so deeply for his lost mother that Izanagi banished him from the heavens and sent him to the realm of the dead. There, in a palace near the entrance, Susanoo maintained his own dominion alongside his mother. This element of the mythology introduces something crucial. Yomi is not merely a prison or tomb, it is a realm with structure, with rulers, with its own form of existence. Those who dwell there continue to have agency, to make decisions, to exercise power. Izanami rules it, possibly with Susanoo's assistance. The realm itself has order, even if that order is fundamentally different from the order of the living world. When the god Okuni-nushi, a descendant of Susanoo, journeyed to Yomi seeking counsel from his father, he was tested with chambers full of snakes, centipedes and bees, creatures associated with death and decay, beings that thrive on decomposing matter. These were not tortures, but trials, ways of determining if Okuni-nushi possessed the strength necessary to survive connection with the underworld. In this mythology, we see that Yomi is not a place of absolute suffering or punishment. It is a realm with its own rules, its own integrity, its own strange existence. Those who dwell there can interact with the living through carefully bounded contact, but the separation remains absolute. To understand Yomi's place in Japanese cosmology, we must understand the three realms that structure all existence. Takamahara, the plane of high heaven, where Amaterasu rules, where light and order reign eternal. This is the celestial realm, the source of blessing and divine will. Ashihara no Nakatsukuni, the middle land of Reed Plain, the earth where humans and most other creatures dwell. This is the realm of the living, of action, of mortality, of change. Yomi-no-Kuni, the land of darkness beneath the earth, where the dead exist in perpetual twilight. This is not a realm of punishment, but of inevitable isolation and separation. These three realms are not separate by accident. They are separated by cosmic principle. The boundary between each is sacred. To cross them inappropriately is to invite disaster. Yomi's specific role in this hierarchy is to be the necessary absence, the required dark space that gives meaning to light. Without Yomi, death would have nowhere to go, and death that lingers in the world of the living causes plague, misfortune, and imbalance. Without Yomi, the living would never develop the spiritual practices of purification and boundary maintenance that allow civilization to function. The kanji used to write Yomi, Huang Quan, combine the character for yellow or pale with the character for spring or fountain. Some scholars see in this a reference to the ancient Chinese underworld concept that influenced Japanese thought, but the deeper meaning lies in the idea of something pale and contaminated, bubbling up from beneath, a source of stagnation rather than vitality. The mythology of Yomi-no-Kuni shaped Japanese culture in lasting, profound ways that persist even today. The concept of Kegare, spiritual pollution, remains central to Shinto practice, even if the explicit mythology has faded from popular consciousness. When a death occurs in a household, specific purification rituals must be performed. In some traditional families, salt is still scattered after a funeral to purify the space. The Obon festival, celebrated every summer, acknowledges that the boundaries between living and dead can briefly become permeable. During this time, the spirits of ancestors are believed to return to visit the living. Lanterns are lit to guide them, offerings are made, and careful rituals ensure that they are honored and then returned to Yomi. The festival is not joyful celebration, but solemn acknowledgement of connection and separation simultaneously. In Shinto funeral practices, which differ markedly from Buddhist ones, the goal is not to ease the soul into the afterlife, but to ensure its proper placement in Yomi and to protect the living from the pollution of death. The dead are typically washed, dressed in white, and prepared with their heads pointing north, a direction associated with death and the underworld. This practice continues the ancient understanding that death requires specific protocols, that the dead must be separated from the living with care and respect. Contemporary Japanese culture still reflects Yomi's influence. Death is spoken of in careful language. To say directly that someone died, shinda, is considered crude. Euphemisms are preferred. Funerals are traditionally handled by Buddhist priests rather than Shinto priests, because Shinto remains fundamentally focused on life and light, unable to comfortably accommodate the pollution of death. This division of labor, Shinto handling marriage and life celebrations, Buddhism handling death and funerals, traces back to the cosmic separation established when Izanagi sealed Yomi's entrance. Yomi-no-Kuni is not presented in mythology as a place to fear in the way that Hades or Sheol or Hell are feared in other traditions. It is not described as a location where punishment awaits the wicked. The dead do not face judgment or torture. They simply exist in a grey, eternal twilight, separated from everything they knew. This absence of moral judgment makes Yomi philosophically sophisticated. It suggests that the ancients who developed this mythology understood something fundamental. Death is not a moral issue. It is not distributed as reward or punishment. It simply comes to everyone, good and evil alike, and when it comes, it takes them to the same grey realm, regardless of their merit or behavior. But at the same time, death is polluting. This is crucial. The pollution of Yomi is not punishment. It is a property of death itself. To touch death is to become spiritually contaminated. To witness decay is to lose vitality. This is not because the gods punish the living for breaking their will, but because death itself is fundamentally opposed to the properties that sustain life: light, motion, order, purity, vital energy. The sealing of Yomotsu Hirasaka represents perhaps the most important act in Japanese mythology. It is more significant than any of Amaterasu's great deeds, more fundamental than Susanu's slaying of the eight-headed dragon. The sealing of the underworld is the act that created the cosmos as it is, that established the possibility of life, that made civilization possible. Without that sealed entrance, Yomi would contaminate the living world endlessly. The dead could not return, but their influence would spread. Misfortune, disease, imbalance, these would plague the living constantly. The sealing is an act of radical separation that is also an act of mercy, because it allows the living to live without being perpetually haunted by the unresolved grief of the dead. One element distinguishes Yomi from many other underworld mythologies. It is not presented as temporary. The dead do not wait in Yomi for resurrection or reincarnation or advancement to another realm. They remain there eternally. The souls remain eternally in Japan, as one Shinto scholar put it, bound to the land of Yomi, which parallels the geographical territory of the living world but never intersects with it. This eternality is important because it reflects the Shinto emphasis on continuity and cyclicity rather than progress or linear time. The cosmos is not moving toward a final judgment or end state. Rather, it is a perpetual cycle of seasons, generations, deaths, and births, with each element in its proper place. Yomi will never be emptied. New souls will continue to enter forever. The realm will continue to exist unchanged until the universe itself ceases, and the mythology offers no prophecy of such cessation. Yomi is eternal, unchanging, grey and constant. Yet it is not hostile or cruel in its permanence. The mythology does not describe the dead as tormented or suffering in Yomi. They are simply there in a state of perpetual twilight, separated from the light and warmth of the living world, but not actively punished. This is actually an act of cosmic mercy. The dead are not forced to watch the living world continue without them. They are safely removed from that pain, even if the removal is permanent. The story of Yomi-no-Kuni is ultimately a story about sacred boundaries and cosmic order. It teaches that not all boundaries are restrictions on freedom. Some boundaries are the very foundations of existence itself. The boundary between life and death is not arbitrary or cruel, it is absolutely necessary. To maintain it requires consciousness, ritual, and deep respect. When Izanagi sealed Yomi's entrance with the boulder, he did not do so maliciously or in anger alone, though anger was certainly part of his response. He sealed it because the alternative would have been unlivable. He sealed it as a father figure would seal off a dangerous place to protect his children and the world they would inherit. The daily loss of 1,000 people and the gain of 1,500 people, this cosmic exchange is not morbid arithmetic. It is a recognition that death is constant and ongoing, and that life must continuously exceed it. This is not optimism exactly, but something more balanced. A recognition that life is always in competition with death, and that the only way to maintain existence is to ensure that new life continually outnumbers those who pass. Yomi shaped every aspect of Japanese spiritual practice. The water purification at Shinto shrines, the careful handling of corpses, the specific protocols for dealing with death, the festivals that honor ancestors, all of these trace back to the mythology of Yomi and the understanding that death is powerful, requiring respect and careful management. Modern people tend to think of death as something to overcome or deny. Ancient Japanese spirituality, encoded in the mythology of Yomi, suggests something different. Death should be acknowledged, honored, carefully separated from life, and then allowed to exist in its own realm. The dead should be remembered and reverenced, but they should not return to trouble the living. Boundaries should be maintained with care and consciousness. The entrance to Yomi, it is said, still exists in Izumo province, now part of Shimane Prefecture. The slope is quiet, dark even on sunny days, and visitors report feeling a chill that seems to come from the earth itself. Whether one believes in the literal existence of the underworld or understands it as myth, the emotional and philosophical truth remains. There is a boundary between life and death, and how we relate to that boundary shapes who we are as a society and as individuals. This is the eternal legacy of Yomi-no-Kuni, not as a place of torture or judgment, but as the necessary dark that gives meaning to light, the necessary silence that gives meaning to sound, the necessary boundary that makes freedom possible. In sealing Yomi, Izanagi did not triumph over death. He accepted it, honored it, and created a cosmos in which both life and death could exist in their proper spheres, neither consuming the other, eternally separate and eternally necessary. If you found this exploration of Japanese mythology fascinating, there's so much more to discover in the stories of the kami and the ancient cosmology of Shinto. Subscribe to History Scrolls for more deep dives into mythology from around the world, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next episode. Thank you for joining us in the shadows of Yomi, and we'll see you next time on History Scrolls.